Today we continue this message series called Give as Good as You Get. And it is a stewardship message series. And last week we explored our time commitment. We talked about from the last book of Revelation that there is no time in heaven. The saints that were here with us today, the saints that sat in these pews or in the pews of the original church, those saints who have gone beyond to heaven are now outside of time worshiping Christ. And they were here where we are now. We are worshiping Christ. Here in the room, here online, or even in the service and love to our neighbor. So we talked about giving a time commitment of how best we can do that and how more we can do that here at St. Matthew. This week, we are going to talk about the treasure commitment. And this is usually the part of a stewardship sermon series that people tune out. Had you known that I was going to do the money sermon today, I told you last week I was doing it in 2 weeks. That's why you're all here today. Kind of fooled you a little bit. I got confused, though. It was nothing malicious. But I don't want you to tune out because I know that talking about money is hard. It's hard in families. It's hard among couples. It's especially hard in church. But it is an important subject and topic to cover, especially today. This past week there have been 2 events that occurred that reminded me of how important it is to recognize what true treasure is. Because in so much of this world, we look at what is treasure is actually temporary and perishable. The first event was that the largest lottery jackpot in history was won by one person in California. So much money that that person's life will be changed. But that's so much money, thousands of lives could have been changed. The second event was the national midterm elections. And all the money that was spent to try to elect to office men and women. In the end, both of these things will have, at best, a temporary effect on the people, on most of the people that are involved. And usually not a good effect on a lot of people. Winning a huge lottery jackpot tends to be a curse rather than a blessing. So much so that there was a TV series called How the Lottery Ruined My Life. Families torn apart, lives changed, and usually not for the better. And the elections didn't do a whole lot of changing for all the money that was spent. The phrase that came to my mind, rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. But here's the truth for you. We would be better off in this world if we would consider as treasure the things that do not perish, that do not fade, that are not temporary. And we need to consider what we consider treasure is temporary in this world. It doesn't mean that the things of this world can't be good or useful or be sought after. It's okay to seek treasure, usually. Depending on the treasure, it can be good for you and even life-changing. But followers of Jesus know that anyone else, better than anyone else, that the greatest treasure in this world, in this life, to seek, to attain, is that which will be eternal, that which will be imperishable. It is our salvation through Jesus Christ alone. But there is more in this world that we consider treasure than mere money or wealth. One of the best opening scenes in movies recently has been from the movie Silverado. After the shootout that starts the movie, the hero, who has been sleeping in a dark and dilapidated shack, shuffles to the door, opens it, and the camera follows him out. He goes off to the right, and you see in the distance the beautiful mountains of the Southwest, and the music swells with the theme of the movie. Now, I'm not doing it justice describing it, but I've always thought that's treasure. That's something that money can't buy. A view like that reminds me of how wonderful this world is that God has given us. I experienced something like that a couple of weeks ago when my family and I spent a couple of days at a home near Manitowoc, Wisconsin. We stayed at this beautiful home on the shore of Lake Michigan, and it was the first day of autumn. And I got up before the rest of the family. I made myself a cup of coffee, sat on the patio outside overlooking Lake Michigan, and watched the sunrise on that first day of autumn. It is scenes like this that remind me that this world is filled with treasure, but everything in this world is still temporary and perishable. It isn't going to last. No treasure in this world ever will. It's all fleeting, which is one of the reasons why Jesus gives us the warning of laying treasure up for yourselves in this world, in the things of this world. Let's take a look at Luke 21 as our text for today. Jesus is in the temple, and he's doing some teaching in the temple courts. And while some were still speaking of the temple where they were, how it was adorned with noble stones and offerings, Jesus said, "As for these things that you see, the days will come when there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." To the early first century Jews, the temple in Jerusalem was the national treasure. It was their national identity. It was their cultural identity. There was nothing more valuable than the temple in Jerusalem. And Jesus burst their bubble by telling them that it is only temporary and thus not worthy of the status they were giving it. Within most of their lifetimes, in fact, it will be utterly destroyed, so much so that it will never, ever be rebuilt again. The only thing existing of that temple is a retaining wall in Jerusalem today. You know it as the Wailing Wall or the Western Wall. It never will exist again except as a fading memory. The warning is that we do not put our personal and national identity in things that won't last. That's good teaching for us today. How many, as recently as 21 years ago, thought that this nation was strong, we were safe from outside enemies, and the things we do for ourselves, build for ourselves, and put our national identity in will last forever? For an answer, think World Trade Center, New York City. Or closer to home, how many members of St. Matthew thought that the church building that they built in 1864 would stand forever and ever? So many people were baptized in that church, confirmed in that church building, married in that church building, and buried from that church building erected in 1864. But 78 years later, all that exists of that building is a cross, some communion vessels that were retired years before, and a melted window and a melted bell. That's all that remains of that original church. These things will not last. No matter how noble, no matter how powerful, they will just not last. So Jesus warns us to not consider them treasure. Instead, consider as treasure only things that will last. Well, like what exactly? Well, consider this. Our nation's principles. The principles that our nation was founded upon. You know them. The principle that all men and women are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is something, those principles will last as long as there is a nation, and as long as there are men and women who are willing to defend these principles, and if need be, fight to defend them. Today is a good day to remember that the men and women of our nation's military are our national treasure, and that they will be a treasure that will last, even though they are temporary. All people are, but their memory goes on. We remember them, we honor them for their service, and in some cases their sacrifice for us. Now, I've seen it in several places on social media. Perhaps you've seen the meme as well. Only two defining forces have ever offered to die for you, Jesus Christ and the American GI. One died for your soul, the other for your freedom. That is our national treasure. It's not a building. It's not a government. It is not a national park. It's not a roaring economy. The men and women who defend our national principles are our national treasure. But as great as they are, our greatest treasure is Jesus Christ. Because Jesus alone is the one who shed his blood to forgive our sins. Jesus alone is the one who died on the cross so that we could live. Jesus alone is the one who rose from the dead so that we could live forever. That is a treasure that will never fade or be destroyed. We have a national treasure to remember and honor today, our veterans, but we have a greater treasure to commit to, Jesus Christ and his salvation for us. So our commitment is a response to what we get from Jesus, our salvation and all the other things that he blesses us with to support this body and life. We get salvation free and forever. So give as good as you get. As you take that commitment card, most of you have received this in the mail. If you did not, there are more on the desk in the church office. And on side A is where you fill out your information, your family names, and how you would like to be contacted, either email, text, or phone. And then you have a place where you will commit of your personal wealth and resources to the work of the church. You see, we commit our resources, we commit our money, as well as our time and our talent, to Christ and to the church, because the church is the embodiment, the living embodiment of Jesus Christ. This is where the work of the church is where people meet Jesus. You may have had friends of yours that kind of complain. They're a little distraught. I need to hear a word from the Lord. Ask them, do you go to church? No, of course not. That's where he's speaking today. We heard it. John Kelly read it to us. The word of the Lord from Malachi. The word of the Lord from the epistle reading. The word of the Lord I read from Luke. You want to hear a word from the Lord? You come to church. You listen to it online. Listen to the podcast that we put out there. And that's what you're committing your treasure to, so that more and more people can hear a word from the Lord. And that your treasure commitment allows us to keep the lights on and the heat working, which, of course, it is very well, especially today. And all the other things that we do, like our early childhood center, where we get to share Jesus with another generation, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds. And perhaps next year, as this is what we're talking about in our Board of Christian Education, to kindergartners. We might have that opportunity before us. Or for our youth ministry, for our elementary youth, our high school youth, our young adults. That's what your treasure commitment is for. It is to Christ. As the feeding of the lambs showed, that tithe, that 10%, and we use the example of dimes because it's easy to see. 10 dimes is $1. And you put 10%, 1 dime in for the work of the church. When we all do that, it starts to add up so that we can continue the mission and ministry here, which is to see the boundless need around us, share the boundless love of Jesus with them, so we all may live with boundless hope. That is where we put our treasure, in things that will last, our salvation that will outlast all others. So as you refocus on Christ today, know this. As you commit your treasure to him and to his church, it will be committed to something that will last. If you're